Now, artifact transparency. So this is something specifically brought in the July 2013 Scrum Guide. So Ken and Jeff brought this in because what they mean by artifact transparency is that the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment are, as we've said before, really key in terms of conveying information about the project. So the product backlog is going to show the priority items, and it's going to show how much of it has been, well, it's going to show how much of it is left to do, number one, and it's going to show what it is that the product owner expects the team to be working on. Sprint backlog is going to show what the plan is for the current sprint, and the increment is going to show what's actually been done. So in terms of these three items, they convey a lot of information about the project, and transparency about this, being really open and honest and making sure that what's conveyed by each of these is open to all of the stakeholders, open to the Scrum team, is really important. It's really important to get these three things right and to get them transparent to everyone. So this whole section on artifact transparency has been added in the July 2013 Scrum Guide to really draw attention to that fact. And I've highlighted the part that says that the Scrum Master must work with the product owner and development team and other involved parties to understand if the artifacts are completely transparent. So the Scrum Master's role, as far as this artifact transparency section is concerned, is to really make sure that these artifacts are transparent. And the Scrum Master must actually help everyone to apply any practices in the absence of that. So for example, with the teams I work with, the burn down is visible. The burn down is visible on the floor that we work on, so that everybody can see where we are. Everybody can see that these, in terms of the sprint, that we're on track or we're not on track. And that sends a really strong message if we're not on track, that something needs to be done, and nobody can kind of get around that, and nobody wants to get around that because the team especially really want to know that. And if we are on track, it sends a really good boost to the team and a really good boost to everyone else around that things are going well. Incidentally, just to backtrack slightly, the two things that I really should have drawn attention to, things that could be tricky in the exam that people might miss, are the development team tracks this. So this is talking about the sprint, monitoring sprint progress, for example, using a sprint burn down. The development team tracks this total work remaining, at least for every daily scrum, to project the likelihood of achieving a sprint. So two things there. The development team are the people that do that. They should be watching the sprint progress themselves and keeping track of that and making sure they're on track. And also at the daily scrum, this should be visible. And the next point, just to backtrack again, is that the product owner compares the amount of work with the remaining. So the product owner here is more on the hook for monitoring progress towards the goal. The team should be focused just on their sprint, and the product owner seeing the bigger picture. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. The definition of done. So this is something really that I've spoken about throughout the whole of my summary, is how important the definition of done is. And this is just saying that although it varies significantly per Scrum team, members must have a shared understanding. So as long as everyone in the team knows what done means, it doesn't matter that it varies from one team to another, because every team's different. Every team's got a different purpose. And they may even have completely different skill sets. You know, software teams will have different outcomes to marketing. And within software teams, people focused on web projects will have different outcomes to people focused on back-end software development projects. So this is to say that although it may vary from team to team, there should at least be a shared understanding. The definition of done is key to everything in Scrum. If the definition of done for an increment is part of the convention, standards or guidelines of the development organization, all of the teams must follow it as a minimum. So that means that essentially well, the reason I've drawn this out is because in industry, it can sometimes be forgotten that your definition of done can often be a departmental standard. So, for example, there was a time in some of the companies that I've worked in where it was a standard that we needed to have automation, test automation. It was nothing to do with Scrum. It was just one of the things we had to do. So therefore, by default, that was part of the definition of done. And in industry, this is often forgotten that you don't have to think too hard sometimes around what it is that constitutes done, because it is part of the setup of your organization. But if it's not a convention, then the team actually have to decide it. And I would recommend, whether there are conventions or not, actually working with the team to decide the definition of done anyway. Because in every situation I've been in, there are things that are not part of the conventions of the organization that will actually achieve quality. And the team know a lot. The team know things that the wider organization don't know. So frankly, not using that knowledge, I think, is just a huge loss. If there are multiple teams, I've highlighted quite a lot here because I've noticed that these come up a lot came up in the assessment, in the open assessment, around this particular part of the Scrum Guide. So the next part says there are multiple Scrum teams working on the system or product release. Sorry, if there are multiple teams working on the system or product release, the development teams and all of the Scrum teams must mutually define the definition of done. So what this is saying is that if you have multiple teams working on a specific product, and we're not talking absolutely huge products here, but there are times when teams collaborate, a back-end so-called team. I say so-called because you can often combine back-end teams into part of the same team. If you've got a back-end team and a front-end team, often they're working together to build the exact same product. So it makes sense that they mutually agree on the definition of done, because otherwise what you end up with is disjointed teams. So this part here is something to really bear in mind if you've got multiple teams essentially working on the same product release, on the same system or product release. So that ends my section on artifacts, spelt with an I. I hope you've got something out of it in terms of being drawn to a few key things that I find can often trip people up in the exam and in fact in real life. And I will speak to you in the final section.